I'd rather trade my bones for moss than reveal who my actual favorite Leech twin is, so Azul, due to proximity, has become my scapegoat for this question. That's it, that's the joke. You've been initiated. Your favorite Leech twin must now also be Azul. At least for today and tomorrow if you're watching this video upon its initial release because it's Azul's birthday. I figured what better time could there be than now to explain why I like this little cephalopod so much, because while the Leech twin thing is just a joke, my enjoyment of Azul's character is not. In fact, Azul was the hand I chose to take when I first started the game, and he's been consistently in my top tier since. However, it would be a little boring to hear me rattle off all the reasons I love Azul while forcing you to stare solely at his face, so today we're doing a little birthday crafting instead, creating a Rosette backing for this pin I picked up in Japan. This is not a birthday pin, unfortunately, but it is a very pretty pin. Since this little craft is being dedicated to Azul, it's only right that we should lay out some facts about his character before my opinion on him. According to his profile, Azul is the Housewarden of Octavanel. He runs a cafe on campus and makes it a point to gather information in all forms. His benevolent demeanor belies an extremely calculating personality. Which is a funny thing to say because how could this little guy possibly be dangerous? Look at this face! No, wait, this one. This one. Ah, there we go. How could someone this earnest be a calculating, shrewd businessman? How could this tea-sipping gentleman possibly mean to harm anyone? This deception is exactly what makes him a devilish threat and such a delightful character to me. You'd never guess from his outward gentlemanly demeanor that darkness and greed have made a home within him. But the more time you spend with Azul and get to know him, the more this veneer wears away to reveal the truth. Azul is also a big fan of fried chicken, coin collecting, alchemy, mental arithmetic, and certain outcomes. Naturally, like every other character in this game, Azul isn't all profit margins and corporate greed. There's nuance within him and rationales for his less desirable bits that make him relatable and his actions a bit understandable. Dealmaker characters have always been a favorite of mine because there is usually a point of no return for them even if they appear to be exceptionally shrewd like Azul. There is only so much predicting you can do, so much calculating that will make sense, and life has a way of throwing curveballs at you regardless of how guarded you are. Dealmakers as an archetype tend to let their hubris trap them in a deal they can't escape, reflecting their bad karma back onto them in some catastrophic way that tests their limits and either changes them or ruins them. It's an inevitability that the audience knows or is expecting to happen, but the whys, hows, and wheres are what make that moment exciting. In Azul's case, Book 3 does what it needs to do in order to create this ruinous situation, and I was quite entertained with the mafia-esque flavoring of the trio, as well as the mystery elements of the narrative. As far as Azul is concerned, it was delightful to see his acting on full display. It very quickly became apparent just how much of his practiced mannerisms were an act since his mask was quick to fall whenever he was under enough pressure, and I found this aspect of his character very interesting. How was he going to react to his eventual downfall, to all of his hard work disappearing in the blink of an eye? What would he do? Obviously, he was going to overblot, but would he be in disbelief like Riddle, or dejected acceptance like Leona? And why did he care so much about these deals? Because it's not like he couldn't rebuild what he lost. Sure, it'd take effort, but if he did it once, he could surely do it again. And from my objective perspective, it was obvious to me that this would be the case and would be the inevitable direction he'd take post-Overblot. But with a bit more ethics and morality thrown in, hopefully. What caught me by surprise, though, was not his manic crash out or the reveal of his mer form, but his backstory. This hit me hard, very hard. So much so that I started tearing up because I knew exactly what some of the things he described felt like. Well, not exactly per se. I'm not an octopus mer person. I don't have a tail fin or magic with which to get back at folks. But I was also bullied a bit for very similar things, and that struck a chord. Now, characters in fiction aren't real people, of course, The experiences that Azul had never technically happened because Azul doesn't actually exist. However, well-written characters often have enough realistic threads to create the illusion of a real person, and Azul is no different. This makes them feel real, makes their struggles feel real, and therefore audience members can connect with them and their stories in a way that sometimes allows us to understand our own emotions and experiences better. There are lessons we can learn without having to go through those experiences ourselves, but sometimes we can also better understand ourselves by seeing our same experiences through somebody else's perspective. I personally believe this to be true for both real and fictional individuals, and it's a huge part of why my love for Azul hasn't faded despite the years. It's not just because he's an elegant deal-making mafioso wannabe, but also because I can see parts of myself and my own experiences in his struggles, which I will briefly be talking about. So if Azul's story is a bit triggering for you, it may be best to skip ahead a little. I don't know the exact pain of Azul because, again, I am not merfolk, nor am I a mage. But if I had a nickel for every time someone told me that you're not fat, you're just chubby, or for being picked last for sports, or for being made it in tag just so that the other kids could have an excuse to exclude me from the other games that they wanted to play by running away from me and pretending to still be playing tag. Or for every time that I was told to go on a diet by friend, foe, and family alike, for every skipped breakfast, for every skipped lunch, among all sorts of other things. Then I'd probably have all of the money in Kalim's school storeroom, and that's a lot of cash. But there is a big difference between Azul and I when it comes to these matters. He chose to react with spite, while I chose to react with sadness. I think as a kid, I wasn't truly aware that the other kids were bullying, since it was never the overt shoving you in a locker kind of stuff. So I was more confused than mad, which then made me sad, which led down a very dark path. Azul, on the other hand, used his pain and talents to transform, and while he also harbored some darkness in this process, he's by and large much better off for his efforts. Reading his story was a bit of a wake-up call to me as well, because I didn't know that spite was an option. What do you mean you can actually use negative emotions to better your life? I can be something other than sad? This was revolutionary, and it caused me to become a bit more motivated to do better for myself. There were a lot of things in the past that I could not control, like my diet, since I wasn't the one shopping, nor did I have the resources to do so. But that's no longer the case. There is a lot that I can control now, a lot that I can do, and even back then there were still things I could have done to make life so much more bearable. There's a piece of me that wishes I could have learned that sooner, but there's another part that is thankful for Azul, because without seeing these pains through his perspective, it might have taken me a lot longer to come to these conclusions. Unfortunately, some of my past actions have caused a bit of damage that is hard to counteract. I'm quite certain some of my memory issues are part of this. But somehow, some way, when I start to doubt my own progress, a certain someone comes to greet me when I log in, reminding me that incremental progress is still progress. And while the timing is very creepy, it is also reassuring. Even in later story beats, I find Azul delightful despite his surface actions remaining very similar to his pre-Overblot self. I think there is a lot of discussions that can be had about the House Warden's reactions to their Overblots, and to varying degrees with which they have enacted change. Riddle, for example, seems to change a lot while someone like Azul doesn't. But at the same time, I'm of the opinion that high schoolers aren't going to do a 180 after one dramatic crash out, especially since the motivations behind some of these characters' actions don't necessarily lend themselves well to visual results. Someone like Riddle always wanted to be released from the pressure of the rules, so while doing so is uncomfortable and unfamiliar, there is an internal motivation to change in the direction we see him starting to go post-Book 1. We can visibly see this much more easily due to the drastic tone shifts of his actions, but Azul does not have that same sort of core motivation. Instead, he focuses on comfort, security, and that manifests very differently, including post-Book 3. Azul isn't suddenly going to stop being interested in business and carving out a little nest egg for himself, because doing so would be contradictory to the stability that he seeks. Azul, therefore, is going to be a bit more ethical in his business dealings, and building up that sort of moral compass is going to take him a lot longer, since his main motivator up until this point was spite, which usually doesn't fuel benevolent actions quite as well as it does vindictive ones. This, too, is another reason I like Azul so much compared to some of the other characters on the cast. He shows the difficulty behind change, not only via his past actions, but the ones he's undertaking now. He hasn't completely foregone his previous habits, but he is deconstructing and rebuilding some of them in a much more balanced way. And I think seeing him struggle to do this is inspiring in its own right. It all goes back to that line about incremental progress. It doesn't need to happen immediately, doesn't have to be earth-shattering, but if you keep chipping away at it, eventually you'll have something worthwhile. That sort of lesson, wrapped in the delightful package that is Azul, is lovely to me. All the extra bit of him being a finance bro and entrepreneur just make him even more delightful. Even if some of it is a bit goofy and immature, but it's all just so fun. He is also a merman, which immediately gives him props in my book. I very much like marine biology, so much so that I almost became a marine biologist, if math wasn't as hard as it is. I would spend all day in an aquarium staring at the fish if I could, so Octavinelle on the whole appeals to that side of me as well. Funnily enough, though, I don't particularly like The Little Mermaid. At least I can't really remember too much about it. What I can remember, though, is that when I was a wee baby bat, I painted Ursula in one of my classes. We had gotten free time towards the end of the day on this particular afternoon, and there were a couple of easels in the back of the classroom with paint, freely available to use. So I drew Ursula because I liked her, I think, or at the very least, she was at the top of my mind for some reason. The finished painting basically amounted to a black and purple blob with squiggles, but given that my young brain seemed to like her enough to paint her, I suppose I was always destined to love these Octavinelle boys to some extent. Is this Rosette the most aesthetically pleasing thing? Perhaps not, but it is a start, and at least for now, it's something that I can hang and enjoy until I decide to upgrade it. Hopefully, I've explained my love for Mr. Business well, but if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, please leave them down below. If you could let me know that you enjoyed this video and want more content like it, I'd appreciate that too. But if comments aren't your thing, you could always like and subscribe instead. Naturally, before you go, I absolutely have to remind you that you're amazing, and I hope you have a wonderful day.